I want to talk to you about the thoracic cage, or what's more commonly referred to as the rib cage. The rib cage is composed of 12 pairs of ribs for a total of 24 ribs, and ribs are named actually by number, and it just goes, just like the vertebrae, it goes from the top down. So this would be rib number 1, second rib, third rib, etc. There's fourth, the fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth, ninth, 10th, 11th, and 12th is kind of 11 and 12 are kind of special down here. Remember that ribs come off of thoracic vertebrae, so each pair of ribs come off of one of the thoracic vertebrae, and the first rib comes off the first thoracic vertebrae, second comes off second thoracic vertebrae, or T2, etc. We can divide these ribs into three general categories. The first 7 ribs, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, you see attached to the sternum, which is this breastbone here in the middle. The first 7 pairs of ribs attach to the sternum directly, and so ribs 1 through 7 are what we call true ribs, because they attach directly to the sternum. Now the next 3 ribs, 8, 9, and 10, connect to the sternum as well, but they do so, first they connect together and then actually join the cartilage of the 7th rib. So ribs 8 through 10 we call false ribs. They still connect to the sternum, but they do so not directly, they do so indirectly through the cartilage of the 7th rib. And then our last 2 ribs down here on the bottom, rib number 11 and rib number 12, are what we call floating ribs. And they're called floating ribs because they actually float. They don't come all the way around, and they don't connect directly to the breastbone or the sternum. So 12 pairs of ribs for a total of 24. The first 7 pairs of ribs are true ribs, the next 3 pairs are false ribs, and then the bottom 2 pairs of ribs are what we call floating ribs. Now in the middle of the chest, the ribs all come together and join in this bone that we already said is called the sternum. One of the major bones in the body that you need to know. The sternum can be divided into 3 parts. The main part of the sternum here in the middle is the body. Easy to remember. The bottom part of the sternum here, this little triangle hangy down thing, is called the xiphoid process. Now remember, a process is a bump of bone, and it usually serves as the attachment for muscles. And in this case, the xiphoid process is going to be really important. Your abdominal muscles are going to insert right there. Xiphoid process, X-I-P-H-O-I-D. It's a great Scrabble word if you ever get the chance to drop that in a game. And then the top part of the sternum here, kind of almost a pentagonal shaped portion of bone, is called the manubrium, M-A-N-U-B-R-I-U-M, the manubrium. So the sternum can be divided into the manubrium on top, the main body, and then the xiphoid process on the bottom. Now if we look closely, there are 2 things on the manubrium that you need to know. And the first is this upper little kind of divot right at the top of the manubrium here. And that upper little divot we call the sternal notch. The sternal notch. Now you also see this referred to as not the sternal notch, but the jugular notch. And I believe, I'd have to double check, but I believe your book actually uses the term jugular notch, so that may be a more appropriate term for us to use than sternal notch here. Jugular notch. And then on the sides of the manubrium you have 2 smaller notches, and these are clavicular notches. and these are where the clavicles or collarbones will hook in. One will go right there, and the other will go right here. So the jugular notch on top, and then a clavicular notch. Jugular, clavicular, clavicular. And those are parts of, again, the manubrium. Here's another view, just a different kind of illustration of the rib cage. Again, 12 pairs of ribs. The first 7 pairs of ribs are true ribs. The next 3 are false ribs. And then good view here at the bottom of 2 floating ribs. And you see that each pair of ribs connects to one of the 12 thoracic vertebrae. Here's your manubrium, the body of the sternum, and the xiphoid process. Same view, same illustration, except now we're looking from behind, kind of a posterior view, looking up at the rib cage. I like this view because you see 2 things. You can see really well here how each one of the ribs articulates with one of the thoracic vertebrae. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 11, 12. You can also see very clearly on this illustration the 2 floating ribs here that don't go all the way around. They just kind of hang out on the back there and don't connect clear around to the front, to the sternum. Nice view here showing the major structures inside of the rib cage. Obviously the rib cage is incredibly important for protecting both the lungs and the heart. The rib cage is also going to be important because between the ribs you're going to have these layers of muscle, and those layers of muscle are going to be really important in expanding your chest cavity or your thoracic cavity, and that's what's going to allow you to breathe. Looking at the anatomy of each rib, this is stuff that's on that last list. So this is stuff that would be a few objectives. So it's the tip of the triangle here. This is stuff that maybe you might even choose not to study, but really it's not that hard. Each rib has an expanded head, and then immediately behind that head we have a tubercle, the tubercle of the rib, which is a bump. And then between those two structures is the neck. So this area right here will be the neck of the rib. And then the rest of the rib is called the shaft. Really simple anatomy. Really simple anatomy. You've got a head, you've got a neck, the tubercle, and a shaft. And we can see here on this illustration, this is a thoracic vertebrae. We can see here that the head articulates right behind the body of the vertebrae. We can see here that the tubercle of the rib articulates with that rib facet, which is part of the transverse process of the thoracic vertebrae that we looked at earlier in the week. And the neck here is that region between the two that actually sits right up alongside of the rib. And then the shaft of the rib is what actually wraps around and forms the wall of the thoracic cage. So that is a discussion, a really brief discussion about the thoracic cage, the ribs, the anatomy of the rib cage as a whole, and then the anatomy of the individual ribs. Really not very difficult stuff at all. So happy studying. Good luck.